Okay, we are recording. I am joined today by Elizabeth Cantalamessa, who is a PhD student at the University of Miami. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Okay, so a lot of your work is on disagreement in art, right? And there are all sorts of ways we can disagree about art, or things that we disagree about, right? We can, there's the question of, is it art? So is Duchamp's fountain art? Is appropriation art? There's the genre question or classification question, right? Is Old Town Road country or hip hop, right? There's
Yes.
those sorts of questions. Then there's evaluative questions, right? That is this work of art good, or is it bad, or is it cheesy, or is it boring, or is it groundbreaking or something, right? All sorts of issues there. And so, in your view, what are we doing when we disagree about art in these ways?
All right, great. So I like that you group those three different ways of disagreeing together because I do kind of tend to group them together when I'm thinking about these disagreements. I don't make strong distinctions between disagreements that are evaluative and disagreements that are maybe classificatory, although I generally think mostly in cases of classificatory disagreements. But I would say maybe my view boils down to the idea that all these sorts of disagreements are good and they're a good thing to have and they're a good thing for us to engage in, mainly because they encourage us to give reasons and defend what we believe and what we've judged or evaluated about a work, or why we think a work should be classified in a given genre. And particularly sort of the kind of disagreements that we have between friends or between people that we know that are maybe low stakes. So whether or not the last season of Game of Thrones was any good, that's more of an evaluative question. Whether Joker, the recent movie Joker, is derivative, another sort of evaluative slash conceptual question. Whether Star Wars, the recent Star Wars movie, should be classified as Star Wars movies. They are, in my view, rich and variable games of giving and asking for reasons, which is a term I adopt from Robert Brandom, which is the idea that it's games, they're things that activities we engage in, and the point is to defend our judgments and appeal to other sensibilities. So we have to make these moves when we're doing these debates in a way that might not be transparent or clear to us before we start doing it. So it's something that, you might make a statement like, Joker is derivative. And what you mean by that is it's clearly inspired by Martin Scorsese films, and it maybe lazily, sort of in a lazy way, uses a lot of those tropes. But then you have to spell that out, and then the person that you're debating with can be engaged by those, moved or convinced by those reasons or not, and then then it's their turn and they try to do the same. So it's more about this back and forth dynamic and this activity exercise that we're doing when we're trying to work out the reasons behind why we think the things that we do about artworks, media, things like that. So it's really important for us to be able to engage with various types of artworks and cultural items, because they enable this sort of localized game of giving and asking for reasons. We should have opinions about art. I think it's a really good thing to commit to something and try to defend it, even if we end up changing our mind in the end or not even really convincing the person that we're debating with. So I also take the sort of view of disagreement that is inspired by T. Wynn's work, which understands disagreement and aesthetic engagement more about sort of the engagement itself versus the winning, right? Or getting somebody to agree. So getting someone to agree is something we like to do, but it's not the main reason we're doing it, so to speak. We're trying to change how other people think and talk about things in the world. Again, artworks, aesthetic cultural items like Star Wars, they're important. We spend money and time engaging with them. We preserve them, we reproduce them in books. So artworks are important cultural items, and so how we think and talk about them matters, and how we behave and treat them matters as well. And because of this, a lot of our judgments are informed by background commitments and background beliefs we have about these important social roles that artworks have. So when you say something's derivative, you think, we shouldn't spend, I don't even know how much money that movie cost, but let's say $100 million to make a movie that ultimately doesn't seem to say anything wholly new or original. So that's something I hope that my work can do, is sort of reveal or illuminate that aspect of aesthetic disagreements, even though we might say things like that isn't art. What we really are saying, when you say that about, say, a Richard Prince work, or Duchamp's Fountain, somebody who's saying that, we're assuming they know that it's in museums and it's reproduced in books and things like that. So they're not expressing an ignorance about that. They're making this normative claim. They're using the term art and using sort of the indicative mood to argue that we should change the rules for what we treat and count as art in a way that this doesn't count anymore, because it's just not original enough. And they could be mistaken, or they could be convinced to think otherwise, I think, about that, which is a nice feature of aesthetic disagreements as well. And I guess part of, like, with genres, it's really fascinating because I take sort of what Simon Evenine, my advisor at Miami, says about genres, which is their historical traditions. So they're sort of always based in the past and then forward looking as well. So it depends what we count as a member of a given genre, depends on, what we have counted before and what will be counted in the future. So it's sort of this open-ended, porous endeavor when we're trying to classify genre works. And that's, again, why you can see such heated debates, on online communities and things of that nature about what counts as, what works should or shouldn't or do or don't count as members of genres. Of course, there could be works that, canonically are considered exemplars of a given genre or tradition. But there's this exciting aspect with aesthetic concepts and aesthetic disagreement. I feel like it's always open to question, even what the experts say or what the textbook says or what have you. So it's a very rich and, like, ubiquitous form of this game of giving and asking for reasons, of trying to defend what we say. Maybe because in part our aesthetic judgments are the reflections of sort of our individuality and our taste and our socio-historical contingencies.
Okay, cool. So in your view, what we're not trying to do is establish matters of fact, right?
Right,
That there
right.
is no, thick matter of fact that Old Town Road is not country, right? That
Right.
it's really hip hop, or there's no fact of the matter, mind independent fact of the matter as to whether or not the Joker is derivative,
Right.
or that the Star Wars, the sequels, right, aren't really Star Wars movies or something of that sort.
Yes, exactly. I actually had the Old Town Road as one of my examples in my, like, write-up for talking with you, because that's one of the ones where you can see that while it's, it's sort of just a genre classification, it has these social and political implications, right? So it matters in this case whether we recognize this work as country, considering the artist himself takes himself to be working within the country tradition. So for the institution, the Grammys or what have you, to not recognize that, I think, can be sort of this political matter as well. So it's an interesting aspect as to whose voices count in these debates, these conceptual debates, since they aren't settled by facts, pre-existing or prior facts. So yeah, that the Little Nas example is a really nice case of this, non-factual debate that has consequences for, material consequences for how other things will be treated and talked about in the future.
It has consequences for the future of country music as well, right? Because as you said a minute ago, right, genres are traditions and they have past, but they're also forward looking, and so they can evolve and change over time. And so I guess it's a question of, is the country tradition going to evolve in this sort of way, or is this a genuine offshoot of country that can develop? Or if we're going to say right now, this is not country, this is a form of hip hop, it's a novelty hip hop song, as I've argued in the past with John Dick, and he argued against me in one of the videos a while ago. I'm not really committed to that, but I was being the good Socratic interlocutor.
Right.
But this idea that, right now we're going to say this is hip hop, this is not country, it's a novelty hip hop song. That's going to have consequences for what country can do in the future, right? That if other artists start doing what Lil Nas X does, right, they're not doing country, and it's never going to be country, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So there's this interesting implication that these causal implications, the classification, institutional classification practices can have on people, on artists, on authors. It's something they talk about, Darren Hudson Hitt talks about in the case of copyright law, where, what's judged to be transformative will have these downstream effects on what other artists think is appropriate, something they can do, something they could get away with, maybe. So it has these, and if you consider as well, people's self-conception and how genres play into that when they're making their works. And if you're destined to only do hip hop, you can't, participate in the country genre. There seems to be a type of sort of injustice going on there, or, your self-conception isn't being realized in the way that maybe it could be. There's nothing factual that's stopping it. You're not wrong. You're just unable to enact the changes maybe that you wanted to.
Yeah, and those reasons are going to be social and political rather than aesthetic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, often.
Yeah.
And that's something too, I wonder, starting to think about these things from the copyright cases, it becomes very unclear to me where sort of aesthetic reasons start and stop and moral or political reasons or legal reasons begin, was the original case. And I just start to think that aesthetic is almost like the bottom layer, and everything is built up from that. And that helps explain why aesthetic disagreements are so everyday, and the type that we, I think, most often engage in, these low stakes disagreements, but in many ways share the same features as very high stakes disagreements about, whether a fetus is a person or something of that nature, if disability is just a social product. So it's a rich, and it's such a rich area for understanding our nature as these self-conscious, socially, embedded beings who have language as a way to cope with, cultural innovation in many ways. So I think, aesthetic production and creativity will always outstrip our ways of thinking and talking about it. And that's a good thing, because then it's always open to change it.
Yeah, right. And one feature I like about your view of disagreement is that, you're tracking, I think, the way actual disagreements work, which I think is really important.
Yay,
right? Because I watch a movie and I think, oh, that sucked, right? This is terrible. But then I post on Facebook or whatever, oh, that sucked.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone responds, well, I liked it. Well, then where do we go from there, right? What that person is doing is saying, you sucked, but you said it sucked, you felt it sucked, you had this initial reaction to it.
Yeah.
Why? Right? Tell us about that. And then, what we're doing is, we're engaging with the art, but we're in a way that involves, continually drawing out these sort of initial gut reactions or these more intuitional things that are going on.
Yes, exactly. That's where I'm hoping to go with this, is that the very same things that we're doing there is what philosophers are doing. This is something I take from Amy Thomason's work. She kind of has a very narrow project with modal language, although I think it could work. And I think she would say it works also with aesthetic language, but it would take a lot to really draw this out. But I just lost my train of thought there. The idea being that they're rule-based. What were we just saying? I'm sorry. My brain went too fast.
Amy Thomason, modal language, just the idea that we're drawing out.
We're drawing out our reasons for it. I don't know where I was going with that.
That's okay. It'll come back.
Yeah, it will.
Or not, or could come back tomorrow.
Yeah, sorry, that it's doing the same sort of thing that philosophers are doing, in the sense that so she uses this idea with modal terms that we're working on our intuitions, that basically we're operating by implicit rules. And we're doing this before we realize that we're doing it, and we do it before we can say we're doing it. And so we develop competency by trying to work out whether a term applies or doesn't apply. So like cheesy, for instance, or boring. And in philosophical cases, we come up with thought experiments. And her interpretation of thought experiments and intuitions is that we're trying to fill out whether a concept should apply. So the twin earth case, for example. And so I think, well, that's kind of what Duchamp's fountain is. It's like a physical version of a thought experiment, in the sense that it's not settled what we should call it. it's not settled by the facts. So it's much more of a, in line with philosophical activity, engagement, and debate than, again, seeming like factual debates. So yeah, it's all about this drawing out your reasons and trying to formulate and make explicit that initial intuition or gut feeling. And I think because in a lot of ways, like sucks and boring, all these like canonical sort of predicates we use are very kind of vague and like even cheesy. I tried to look it up just to be like, what exactly does it mean? And of course, part of my whole view is a dictionary doesn't determine what they mean anyway, but we have some sort of public understanding that we're constantly trying to negotiate and get clearer about. But I don't think we'll find the concept. I guess the idea is this is an ongoing process, and depending on what's produced in the future, we'll have new ways of thinking and talking about boring or derivative. But yeah, and I think Facebook has been really fascinating lately because Matt Stroll is doing all these lists. And that's something I like to do with students, is get them, because that's a perfect way to commit and defend, to various positions. You have to say like why, Eyes Wide Shut is above The Shining, for instance, and Stanley Kubrick's OR. And it gets people again to, then they want to make their list, and it's not about whose list is the best list. It's more about, why would you put this one above that one, and vice versa. So I really like this idea that I think Stroll's working on about bad art, where bad art is actually valuable because it supports all these different interpretations and gets us to encourage other people to adopt different perspectives. And the more perspectives you can take, sort of the more, I guess, value you have in it. So I think I'm making a very similar point, but maybe more Kantian, in that it's the sort of self-conception and rule-based activity that we're doing, that we gain a better understanding of like sort of what we think and what we think, or what we thought we knew, but we might not in fact have known.
Yeah, cool. So you're engaging with disagreement, but what do you think about agreement?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because there is, with some works of art, there's sort of widespread agreement as to, whether they're great or not. I mean, let's just deal with the evaluative cases maybe. Right? That there's, widespread agreement that Ode to Joy, right, is this sort of phenomenal, amazing song, or that Skip James' Hard Time Killing Floor Blues is haunting, right? Or that the movie White Chicks is terrible, right? That how do you deal with agreement, right? I mean, obviously it's not inconsistent with anything you're doing, but how do you think about agreement?
Yeah, so I actually don't spend enough time, I think, thinking about disagreement or thinking about agreement. But I do have to say, it's funny you say Ode to Joy, because I'm not a Zizek fan by any means, but he has the film The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, where he gives a sort of psychoanalysis of various media pieces, films, and things. Anyway, he makes this point about Ode to Joy and how it has this mass appeal from, the Nazis to the UN to all these desperate political and cultural groups. And he concludes from that it's actually empty. It has no meaning. And so because it's so empty, anyone can adopt it. And he actually then ends up saying it's ironic. Beethoven's like being ironic. And I don't know about all that stuff. But I think there is something to the idea that maybe certain things have enduring value or appeal to us because of sort of broader traditions that we're all a part of, or maybe they just have more like simpler, more accessible meanings. Like Starry Night is another one I was thinking about that I think almost everyone would judge as beautiful in some sense. And then it's also our tastes are products of cultural, historical, circumstances. So we've all been taught from a very young age, that Beethoven is one of the greats and Ode to Joy is one of his greatest. So I think of convergence on works is also maybe a matter of socialization. And of course, like museums and things aren't just displaying works that have pre-existing inherent value. They're conveying the value. They're teaching us what should be treated as valuable or beautiful. So I think agreement is a good thing, of course, but I think if we all agreed on everything, that would be bad and that would be boring. So disagreement still kind of seems to have this better value. But then I think of agreement in aesthetic cases as probably helping create aesthetic communities, so, having agreement on which works are, the canonical best works. Or um, one of my best friends is a huge Glenn Danzig fan. And we got talking about this, and apparently in that community, Danzig 1 to 4 are the only accepted. Those are the canonical albums that are aesthetically worthy, or they have musical merit and talent, all these sorts of things. This is what makes Glenn Danzig like a good performer and a good musician. The other ones we like because we like Glenn Danzig, but it's 1 through 4 that, is anybody who's a fan recognizes this, and you all know that everybody else knows this. So to say, I guess Danzig Does Elvis is the best Danzig album would be to somehow make a joke or to dismiss the community itself. So there's this fascinating thing, I think, that agreement maybe serves this communal bonding function and can start to initiate or individuate maybe communities and stuff. So agreement is definitely an important part of this, although it doesn't seem to get the process going as much in this. It seems it's an important part of the process, but it's not the part that gets it sort of going in this dynamic way of that disagreement does. But then I went, so as I was saying earlier, the point about white chicks does make me wonder about where we could be wrong. So where's the line of, where's the threshold of you're just wrong? If you do think White Chicks is, an Oscar worthy film, I want to say like you're kind of mistaken there. So that, facts aren't the settlers of it, but maybe facts play some role, like could consider how it was intended, and I don't know. So yeah, we would lose something important and valuable if we all agreed. However, agreement doesn't seem to be like a bad thing, I guess, on my view. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, on that notion of, taste communities or aesthetic communities that form around certain artists or certain kinds of art, that they're grunge fans, they're heavy metal fans, but then there's a sort of more specific, they're Glenn Danzig fans,
Mm-hmm.
they're Metallica fans or whatever. I think a lot of like the most extreme forms of disagreement come out within those communities,
Yes.
right? Because if someone's outside that
Mm-hmm.
the Glenn Danzig community, right, and is like, well, Danzig Does Elvis is clearly the best Danzig album, that person could just be dismissed.
Yes.
Right. Like,
yes.
You don't know what you're talking about. You're not a part of this community.
Right.
But if someone within the community who's like well established within the community is like, I've been thinking about this a lot, and Danzig Does Elvis really is his best work, and all of his other work should be judged in relation to it.
Right.
There, the agreements or the disagreement, I think, is going to be really extreme and vocal.
Yes.
But there, I think it's going to be the most valuable also to like work out what's going on here. Like, how could someone think this?
Right. Yeah, they would have to post, make a long thread or some kind of blog post to really lay out, make a case for that. But yeah, I've been thinking about, I am an admitted very, very pathological Bob Dylan fan. So I'm almost like deadhead, some people would say I'm deadhead level, right? So very similarly, there are certain people I would engage in the question of what Dylan songs performances are the best. And there are other people that I don't want to even engage in it, because it won't, it's not a waste of time, but it won't be this, sort of same, we're not at the same level in that sense. We're not kind of speaking the same language game, I guess would be the thing. So yeah, when the rules might not be clear to us, but then you can start to sort of make the moves, and it becomes clear. Okay, why can't I make the move that Danzig Does Elvis is the best Danzig album? Yeah, and other people, of course, it's all a matter of how other people accept and reject what you say as well. So yeah, so it's a fascinating thing about online communities and how this has really helped sort of facilitate it and make it sort of more obvious what's going on, I guess, for thinking about it.
Yeah, cool. So just on and the piece on Psyche, right? You talk about Bon Jovi and their cheesiness, and just really not their cheesiness, but the cheesiness of Living on a Prayer in particular. And I think that could be contested, right? That, I think Wanted Dead or Alive, that song is clearly cheesy, right? I mean, lyrically it's cheesy, like music is cheesy. Living on a Prayer, I think, there could be a case made that it's not cheesy. And I think, one thing, it came on the radio last week, actually, sort of, as I was thinking about talking with you. And I sort of really paid attention to it in a way that I haven't in a long time. I mean, I really like this song. I think it's fantastic. But like just how much work the bass is doing in that, like
Right.
really just like floored me. I was like, whoa, this is sort of awesome. And then, I mean, the key change, at the end and like the final, chorus or whatever, the last two choruses, um, it's sort of sublime, right? I mean, like that key change just hits and it's like, whoa, like I just want to, sing along with this. And I wish there were a crowd with me, right? That we could do this together.
Right.
But one thing that makes it possibly not cheesy is the lyrics themselves and the verses, right? In the first, like I reread them and was thinking about them, right? In the first verse, the guy has been fired, right? He's down on his luck. So his girlfriend is, working at the restaurant or the diner, right? Making money for them. And she's the one that does the first chorus, right? We're halfway there. We're living on a prayer. The second verse, she wants to run away.
Ah.
Right. She wants to leave this relationship because, he's pawned his guitar, right? I thought about
Yeah.
that. Right?
Yeah. I love it.
He pawned his guitar and now he's like angry and like bitter and like moody and not pleasant to be around. Now she wants to run away. And at the end of the second verse, he's saying, we have to hold on. So he's repeating what she said.
Right.
And so maybe like lyrically, I think the verses at least are a lot more subtle than the chorus.
Right.
Where it's like this anthem of, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to be this, we're halfway there. We're going to be there. But I think the lyrics of the second verse sort of undercut that, similar to how so many people misinterpret Every Breath You Take by the Police. Right, where that song's about a stalker.
Right.
Like the narrator's a stalker and he's like, every breath you take, I'll be watching you, right? It's supposed to be menacing, yet that's so many people's like first dance at their wedding or whatever. At least it used to be back in the day. And I think Living on a Prayer may have been misinterpreted perhaps, and maybe it's less cheesy than some people would want to argue that it is.
Right. No, yeah, I love that. And I have to admit, I haven't given it much consideration, but it did come. So the example of Bon Jovi being cheesy did come from a real life debate that I had with a friend over whether or not it was cheesy. And he said no. And part of his argument was, at the time, in the 80s, this was the thing that you did. This is how music sounded. These were the sorts of chords and choruses that you had. Given the genre that they were trying to work in. And that got me thinking about how cheesiness is almost like generational or something. Like what you think of as cheesy kind of reveals, something about like your tastes and what you grew up in. And like, yeah, your sensibility is what you expect. So I looked up other cheesy songs, right? Skater Boy by Avril Lavigne is on there. And it's like, and I could probably go on if I thought about it. I could probably give maybe a nice interpretation of the significance of it. So the example of cheesiness was kind of more trying to make that point about it being a sort of historical changing thing where it doesn't seem to be very clear like what cheesy is, and it seems to change as sort of time and generation happens. So what wasn't cheesy could become cheesy. In this case, hard sort of 80s hard metal rock type thing. But I like your point about the lyrics sort of undercutting the cheesiness sound, and having this more nuance that I hadn't given it depth about. It reminds me of the Pina Colada song, which I think kind of maybe has a similar fate, where it seems sort of very cheesy and silly, but when you listen to it, it's kind of this complex story about a relationship that's alienated that comes to find each other again. So yeah, I guess when I say cheesy, I don't mean dismissive. I don't mean it doesn't have value, but I do mean, as I was saying earlier, we shouldn't engrave it on a golden CD and send it into space. Or maybe the last scene of Sopranos, it shouldn't be the soundtrack for that. Or something like that.
Yeah, the Pina Colada song, I think, is cheesy. I mean, that could be a case where despite the lyrics, it is cheesy just because of the mode of presentation is like like that's a song that haunts my soul also. Like if I hear that on the radio, like it sticks with me for weeks. And like ever no, get out of my head.
Yeah, that's my go-to karaoke song.
Oh
I
wow.
love that song. Yeah, back when we could do that.
Yeah, back when that
Yeah,
was a thing we could do.
it's
Whereas
a crowd pleaser.
my go-to is Deep Blue Something's Breakfast at Tiffany's. Like,
That's
yeah,
that's a good one.
it's like perfect in my range. Like I can hit those notes because it's, you know, not complicated. But yeah, that's like about as cheesy as a song.
Yeah, I was gonna say another one. I think maybe a better example I should have used as "Life is a Highway," because that's kind of like paradigmatically. But yeah, I funnily the Psyche piece was up, and I saw it on Twitter. Some Bon Jovi fan had retweeted it and strongly disagreed with my saying that it was cheesy and questioned my dissertation and my credentials. So I apparently struck a nerve, which again kind of is my point of, you know, I'm not stating a fact there. I'm sort of initiating a debate there, and I'm asking you, or you know, okay, tell me why it shouldn't be cheesy. And you've given me a great reason to reconsider it. So I'm definitely going to listen again for both the bass and the lyrics and give it another chance.
Yeah.
Although I do want to ask you, do you think they were aiming? I mean, obviously, I don't want to just be like, what were they thinking, like with their psychological states? But for the "On a Steel Horse I Ride,"
Yeah.
did they take that to be cheesy, you think? Do they know? Are they trying to kind of play it up?
I honestly don't know if they're hamming it up
That
or if like it
yeah.
was meant like sincerely. Like this is an earnest expression of something or other. And I can't recall like whether that showed up on a soundtrack like Young Guns 2 or something, and maybe it was
Right.
like an expression of what was like that's like I'll have to look that
Yes.
up, right? Because maybe it's
Yeah.
charitably like this is about the movie. This isn't about me, John Bon Jovi, or us, the band Bon Jovi, right? Maybe this is about the characters or what's going on. Or it could be, you know, he's just imagining a scenario where, you know, he views himself that way. But yeah, that's like a weird attitude to have about yourself, right? That I ride this steel horse and the law's out to get me and there's a bounty out for my life, right? Like that's not about John Bon Jovi.
Right. So maybe that's one way we can kind of like distinguish cheesiness and not, is like, is it really getting at some like, you know, personal experience, universal type thing, or is it maybe just sort of playing with sounds and ideas and stuff like that? And what that means really needs to be fleshed out, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, okay. Cool. I like that.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks. Take care.
Yay.